Hello and welcome to Recap Radio. I'm Diego Cupolo, editor-in-chief of Turkey Recap, and this is our live show about Turkish politics and foreign policy. Today I'm talking to Gönül Tol, director of the Turkey program at the Middle East Institute in Washington, and author of the book Erdogan's War, A Strongman, at home and in Syria, which I highly recommend for understanding what's going on in Turkey right now, both domestically and in foreign affairs. Thanks, Gönül. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for inviting me, Diego. Always a pleasure to speak with you, no matter how unpleasant the topic is.
Yeah, we've got a lot to get through, and you have 40 minutes to talk, so I'm going to try to speed through this one. Basically, there's three converging developments with massive implications for Turkey's future. One of them is that the government's cracking down on the opposition party, the CHP, Republican People's Party. The other is there's ongoing negotiations to advance the PKK peace process. And third, we have efforts to stabilize Syria, where the transition government and Kurdish groups have been slow to integrate after the fall of Bashar al-Assad. In this webcast, we hope to unwrap how these different developments impact each other and hopefully help people understand what might come next. Before we start, let me say this is a live recording. People are welcome to send questions as we talk. Again, it will be 40 minutes. So Gönül, let's just go straight into it. Police were clashing with protesters today in Istanbul. They tear gassed politicians with the CHP. They installed a court-appointed trustee. And it looks like there's a takeover of CHP democratically elected functions and officials. How do you describe what's happening right now? And what do you think the government's strategy is?
Well, Diego, this is just another unfortunate turning point in Turkish politics. I think there's been a gradual crackdown on all democratic avenues on Erdogan's part. And this has been going on for many years now. And what we saw in March with Istanbul Mayor İmamoğlu's arrest was a big giant step towards accelerating that autocratization. Despite all its problems, what we saw in Turkey was that elections somewhat worked. Obviously, they were not free, mostly unfair, but still that mechanism was one of the rare mechanisms through which people were able to express their views. They had the right to choose their leaders, be their mayors or the person, their presidential candidate, right? So in March, when Erdogan granted Ekrem İmamoğlu's arrest, I think it was a turning point in the sense that Erdogan wants to turn Turkey into a Russia-style autocracy where the ballot box does not matter anymore, right? So right now, millions of people who live in Istanbul, their right to choose their mayor has been trampled on. And with the arrest of CHP, Istanbul branch head, with his removal, along with almost 200 CHP officials, what we're seeing is Erdogan also does not allow the opposition party to pick its own officials. So this is a dangerous escalation. We saw that again with Ekrem İmamoğlu's arrest, but this clearly shows us that there's Erdogan is in such a hurry to make sure that before 2028, he establishes a kind of autocracy where he himself handpicks his own opponents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and why now? I mean, there's no elections in sight. Do you think that he needs this much time to establish this autocracy, as you say, and make the field uncompetitive before the next elections?
That's exactly why, because he has time, right? He doesn't want to do this right before the elections because he learned the lesson from 2019 when he basically did not accept the election results in Istanbul and he called for a rerun and he lost Istanbul by even a bigger margin. So he understands that Turkish voters do not like it when you disrespect their free will, right? So that's why I think Erdogan thinks that time is on his side. So whatever the fallout might be because of all this repression, he feels that he can afford it. So that's why I think if elections were to be held next year, I think he would be more careful. But that's not the case. So he has time.
Mm-hmm. And right before we started speaking, following the appointment of the trustee entered the building. The CHP filed some paperwork, according to reports, to shut down that headquarters in Istanbul. What do you make of the CHP's response to date? Because they've been undergoing serious judicial harassment at this point. There's so many trials that they're unable to function, and many different trustees have been appointed to different parts of different CHP-run municipalities. What do you think of their response, and what do you expect them to do next?
Well, this is a heroic effort and also a desperate effort. We're talking about a party, the main opposition party, that is immense pressure, not just by government and its courts, but also it's under pressure from within, from people from its own ranks. You have Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu waiting on the wings to come back as the head of the party. And you have people like Gürsel Tekin, who was appointed trustee after the courts removed the branch head. So this is a party that is trying to come up with creative ways to resist this autocratization. But it's become increasingly difficult because Erdogan is shutting down all democratic avenues to resist this autocratization. And I think Özgür Özel, the head of the CHP, has been doing a great job in terms of mobilizing the people, in terms of calling on the people to take to the streets. And people they have been taking immense risk, right? When they take to the streets, when they protest, they have a lot to lose. And yet they've been doing that. This just shows the level of frustration. And yet I think we've come a point where I'm not sure how effective those protests have become, right? Because this is a time when you just you cannot bank on the traditional democratic tools at your disposal to resist a regime, because this is a time that calls for, I think, extreme measures. So what we're seeing today in the CHP's response to this recent removals is that desperate attempt. So on the one hand, I have a great respect because Özgür Özel simply could have given up. He's not. But on the other hand, this just shows how fast we have become a country where there are just a few democratic avenues left for pro-democracy segments of the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to underline your points about people getting arrested, I've been seeing on Twitter so many people say I'm being taken in, I'm being detained right now, that are participating in these protests. And I spoke to some CHP staffers this morning. They're expecting a lot of arrests today, basically a huge wave of detentions to try to deter people from coming out and protesting these moves that we're witnessing. I guess anything can happen. Do you have any thoughts on the CHP Congress trial next week? Because this seems kind of like we're building up to that point. Do you expect a decision? Too soon to tell? Anything you can share?
Look, I think anything can happen because I think although many people imagine last year, early this year, people were talking about Erdogan wanting to arrest İmamoğlu, to remove him from the race. But at the end of the day, it still came as a shock to a lot of people, and mainly because the argument was, Turkish economy, given the state that it's in, and given how much Mehmet Şimşek, Turkey's finance minister, is trying to attract foreign direct investment, many people thought that this was too big of a risk for Erdogan to take, and yet he took that risk, right? So, and again, what he did with the CHP's Istanbul branch is just another huge, very risky step. So we don't know the limits to what Erdogan could do next. And September 15th, the court could very well decide to remove Özgür Özel, the current leadership, and reinstate Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. So that wouldn't come as a huge shock. So that could happen. But even if it does not happen, we are still talking about an Erdogan who is trying to cripple the CHP, which has become the country's biggest party. Right? In 2024 municipal elections, CHP captured the most votes across the country. So now it commands a bigger majority than the ruling coalition. So that's a huge thing. And yet Erdogan is trying to, in a way, flood the field with all this chaos. So even if the court, come September 15, the court decides not to do anything about the current leadership, decides not to remove, it's still, what Erdogan has done so far is still quite damaging. Even the scenes that we're seeing today, Gürsel Tekin, who, by the way, I mean, he used to be a CHP member, and then he resigned, but still, I mean, he associates himself with the CHP, and he's trying to barge into this building. He's surrounded by security forces. Security forces are beating up the members of the party who are trying to enter the headquarters. So even that picture itself, that optics, is pretty damaging for the CHP, because the CHP has always traditionally had this image of a party that is, that cannot get its act together. And it's, I think, Erdogan's goal to make sure that that image is even stronger in the minds of the voters. And he's achieved that. So at this point, we don't need the court to remove Özgür Özel. I think they've done enough damage to the party.
Yeah, those are very interesting points. Let's bring in the peace process, because at the same time you have this democratic backsliding, you have a democratic opening for other members of Turkey's political community, which is the PKK peace process and possibly some expansion of Kurdish language rights or representation rights. Before we move into that, let me just disclose that my wife is an MP with the pro-Kurdish Dem Party. And we see these developments happening now, where you have, let's say, anti-Erdogan protesters going out to protest since İmamoğlu's arrest. And many times people have asked on social media and to me where Dem Party stands. Dem Party has condemned this anti-democratic move against CHP, but they're not so present in the protest, right? And there's different reasons for this. We can get into it. But something I noted while reading your book is that the same thing happened during the 2013 Gezi protests, right? There was a large coalition of anti-Erdogan protests, but the Kurdish presence was light on the ground. They made their statements. Obviously, there were different figures that made announcements and different protests. But what do you make of this division between the opposition parties? And is it something that Erdogan continuously exploits to get what he wants?
Yes, I mean, that's exactly been Erdogan's plan all along. That's Erdogan's strategy, which is working, right? Erdogan, whenever he reaches out to the PKK or the pro-Kurdish party, always one eye has always been on the goal of dividing the opposition, because the opposition is very strong when it is united when the Kurds and Turks and Democrats and the Islamists, when the anti-Erdogan bloc is united, then it's very difficult for Erdogan to take them down through legal means, right? So that's why he always wanted to divide that opposition. So in 2013, you referred to Gezi protests. Yes, the pro-Kurdish party, HDP, at the time sat on the sidelines. And from their point of view, it made sense because at the time they were, just like they are today, at the time they were seeking this reconciliation with Erdogan. Erdogan had launched this Kurdish opening, and what was happening in Syria contributed to that. But Erdogan's main driver, as it has always been, was to make sure that he realizes his goal of establishing a super an executive presidency, right? And he was seeking Kurdish support for that. So that was his number one goal for launching that Kurdish opening at the time. And the Kurds thought that they did not want that was a historic moment, and they didn't really want to harm the process. And they said that themselves. The PKK leadership in northern Iraq said, you know, we have to be careful because this is an important historic juncture. We are negotiating with Erdogan, and this could be a great opportunity. So they didn't want to wholeheartedly, they didn't want to join the protests during Gezi, right? So fast forward to 2025, and they are in the exact same spot. And now I think, look, no one can blame the Kurds for seeking peace, right? I think anyone with a conscience and with a moral compass would, no one would have opposed to a peace deal between the PKK and the government. So under normal circumstances, and I have to reiterate that because I get criticized all the time by people who don't know what I have done and written in the past, I've always supported the Kurds' democratic fight for rights and freedom. And I'm still there. But here is my worry about the current peace process. I think Erdogan's autocracy has come too far at this point to grant rights and freedom to anyone, and that includes the Kurds. So I think Kurds, although understandably, they feel like they don't have an option, that they have to, that this is an opportunity that they don't want to miss. But time and time again, we've seen, this is not Erdogan's first Kurdish opening. We've seen this movie before. So I think they are being a little naive in thinking that Erdogan can actually finally grant what they've been seeking, their democratic rights. Right? So Erdogan, at a time when he's trying to centralize more power, at a time when he's trying to consolidate autocracy, is not going to grant anyone more freedoms. Even if he grants constitutional rights, we are talking about a man who does not respect the constitution, right? So that's why I think the Kurdish party is in this very difficult spot where on the one hand, they feel like they don't have an option but to talk to Erdogan because maybe they think that Erdogan is gonna be there forever. So they have to speak with him if they want to actually solve anything. But on the other hand, this is a time when Erdogan is in no position and is not willing to open a democratic space, which is necessary to solve the Kurdish problem. So that leaves the Kurds in a very delicate spot where they are risking the goodwill that they had accumulated thanks to their fight for Turkish democracy. Remember Selahattin Demirtas, he's been in jail for so long, and he was the man who led the HDP to capture a historic 13% in 2015 elections, right? That was a historic opportunity. And Selahattin Demirtas was able to do that by appealing to a larger constituency, a larger than the Kurdish constituency. He appealed to the people who had traditionally voted for the CHP, because they thought that what was at stake was too big to pursue a partisan line. And they really believed in the message of Selahattin Demirtas that we are all in this together. And what's at stake is Turkish democracy. Democracy for Turks, democracy for Kurds. And that's how he was able to um, uh, appeal to these different segments of the country. So now we are in a place where the pro-Kurdish party is risking to lose that support, to lose that that appeal it had garnered. So, and it's basically Erdogan has succeeded at driving a wedge between the Turkish and Kurdish opposition.
Yeah, and to just dive a little deeper into that, you wrote in June for Foreign Policy magazine a piece titled Don't Trust Erdogan's Peace Process with the Kurds. You basically made the case that he's not interested in democracy, he's interested in consolidating power, which is also what your book is about, basically. Do you still think is that still how you think about the process, that he's mainly trying to stay in power through this?
No, I have zero doubts about that. That's he's always been laser focused on that. And in retrospect, and that's what the whole book is about. Even now, some people were very smart to see that at the time. I wasn't one of them, unfortunately, because at the time, when the AKP came to power, I genuinely thought that he could deliver a much needed democracy, but more importantly, that he could deliver a Turkish-Kurdish peace. So that's why I believed in the message he was delivering at the time. But now when I look back on things in retrospect, I think even the democratic reforms that he had carried out at the time, they were all laser focused on paving the way for a one-man rule. So that's always been his goal. And every action that he takes, whether it's in the domestic politics on foreign policy, the number one driver behind all of his actions is to make sure that he stays in power for life.
Yeah, and also, while we're on this topic of consolidating power, you also argue against foreign politicians or policymakers that classify Erdogan as an Islamist only. Basically, many people simplify it by saying, "Oh, he wants to put Sunni Muslims in a higher level," but you push back on that, saying that it's also just another power move. His appeals to religious groups by converting the Hagia Sophia or empowering different sects in the state functions, or these recent draft laws that we've been seeing about women's alimony and inheritance laws. These appeal to conservative voters. So my question for you, while we're on this Erdogan is trying to consolidate power theme, is where does religion play into this? How much do you think that he is dedicated to advancing a certain kind of conservatism, and how much of that is just for politics?
Look, I don't know what's at his heart, if he could be an Islamist at heart, but from a political science point of view, political scientists don't care about what's in your heart as long as that doesn't translate into policy, right? So if you look at Erdogan's long tenure, you will see, starting from 2002, you see Islamism, I would say from 2002 to maybe 2009, 2010, Islamism, you couldn't identify the policies that he was pursuing as Islamist. Conservative, yes, but not Islamist in the true meaning of the sense, right? And at the time, he had defined himself as a conservative democratic party. That's how he defined the ruling AKP. That's how he defined himself. He said that he broke with his Islamist past. And you could find evidence, again, in his actions and his policies that was the case. Yes, he did attempt to lift the ban on the headscarf, for example. And one could argue that maybe that was an Islamist move, but then he backed down. Faced with a pushback from the secularist circles, he backed down, right? So, and I remember this, one of his very first interviews with journalists shortly after the AKP's election victory in 2002. One of the questions a journalist asked was what was his priority and whether he was going to move fast on lifting the ban on the headscarf. And he said, no, that's not my priority at all. My priority is to get Turkey into the European Union. So that's why I think I define Erdogan as a populist first and foremost. And populism is an interesting thing because it's shallow. It's not an ideology. So it's a political style, right? And as a political style, it doesn't offer you answers to larger social, economic, and political problems. So what do populists do? They match their populist style with different ideologies. And how do they pick which ideology to choose? It depends on the coalition that they want to put together to stay in power. So when Erdogan first came to power, he had this large ideologically wide coalition. It included Islamists, it included Turks, Kurds, secularists, pro-democracy forces, even social democrats, right? So with that kind of coalition in mind, he couldn't, it wouldn't be wise for him to pursue Islamist policies. So instead, he picked this brand of conservative democratic brand, right? And that brand delivered what Erdogan wanted to deliver. And when he set his eyes on a new goal, starting from 2010, 2011, and that was he had captured enough power. But from then on, his new goal was to grab more unchecked power, right? And he thought that he could be able to do that through establishing an executive presidency. And that new goal required a new coalition because you couldn't really get Democrats and liberals behind that autocratic project. So he set his eyes on the country's Islamists, Turkish and Kurdish Islamists, and the conservative segments of the country. So that strategy required a new ideology, and that's when he, from 2011 onwards, that's when he, I think, utilized Islamism as an ideology. And that didn't work. How do we know that didn't work? In 2015, first, the Islamist coalition broke down, right? Fight with the Gülenists, the cracks on that front. And then you have the Kurds saying, sorry, but we're not going to back your one-man rule. So that strategy collapsed. And we know that from 2015 June elections, and that was when his party lost the parliamentary majority. So he understood that the coalition that he had in mind, that he expected to bring him to realize his presidentialism dream, didn't work. So he changed. He changed his plan, and he started banking on the Turkish nationalists. And all of a sudden, he became the biggest, the strongest, the most vocal Turkish nationalist. So all this is to say, ideology for Erdogan is just a tool, right? He's not. He just picks and chooses. And in the last few years, religion and making sure that this new definition of Turkish nationalism, where Sunni Islam plays a larger part, that has become just another tool for him to make sure that he remains in power. And that's become more important in the last few years. Why? Because he's running out of options. Turkish economy is not doing well, and then we don't know what will happen to the Kurdish peace process. So his coalition is crumbling. He's losing ground. So that's why he is now using all those symbolisms, those emotional tools to stop the bleeding, in a sense.
Mm-hmm. While cracking down on the CHP. To move to Syria, before I want to get into Syria a little bit, Erdogan's coalition partner, Devlet Bahçeli, has been threatening military intervention if the SDF does not integrate with Damascus and uphold the March 10th agreement that would see the forces join under central government rule. This is happening while the peace process and the PKK are negotiating with the Turkish state. Can developments in Syria disrupt the peace process in Turkey? How do you see it?
Certainly. And to your viewers, I have a piece coming up in Foreign Policy on Wednesday, exactly on that question. And here's the gist of my argument. I think, yes, Erdogan has been threatening military action. Devlet Bahçeli he wants Turkey to pursue a more aggressive policy. We've heard the same rhetoric from Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan. But I think it's a very risky move. It's a risky move for Turkey. It's a risky move for Damascus and the new leaders there. And above all, it won't solve anyone's problems, right? So imagine in the old quote unquote good days for Erdogan, whenever he had a problem at home, he would just launch another military incursion into Syria. And that would solve pretty much many of his problems, right?
Mhm.
So he had the green light from Russia, and he had a really militarily weak, diplomatically weak regime in Damascus. And all he needed to do was to shake hands with Putin and send Turkish military across the border. What did that solve? That's debatable, but from a domestic optics point of view, he claimed that burnished his nationalist image, that really consolidated the nationalist coalition that he had put together. So that solved his problems. But in the new Syria, he cannot use that tool anymore. Why? Because first of all, as you just mentioned, he's pursuing these talks with Öcalan, and that's really key to everything that he wants to do at home, starting from solving the constitution problem that he has. The current constitution doesn't allow him to run again in 2028. And even if he doesn't seek a redrafting the constitution, he's still hoping to bank on the pro-Kurdish party votes in the parliament to call for early elections so he's able to run again, right? So that is his entire strategy. And even if things go extremely well with talks with Öcalan, one very complicating piece is the Syria piece. The Syrian Kurds now, they find themselves in a tricky situation and a somewhat emboldened situation after the clashes in Sueda in southern Syria. Before that, there were talks between Damascus and the Syrian Kurds, and Turkey was pushing both to reach an agreement. So that would remove a major irritant in the process with Öcalan, right? So Erdogan has been pushing the Kurds, pushing Damascus, pushing Americans to make sure that some kind of agreement is reached. The YPG is integrated into the Syrian military, so Erdogan can declare, we solved the PKK problem. PKK has withdrawn from Turkish territory. In northern Iraq, it has disarmed. In Syria, we ended the Kurdish autonomous region. There is no force called the YPG. So he could use that narrative and claim victory. That's what he was hoping for. Except that's not how things are playing out in Syria. Right now, the Syrian Kurds, look at Suwaida, what happened there, and see, well, we cannot really lay down our arms because in Damascus, there is a regime that is not stable. It can, in their view, it can collapse any minute. So we want to be in a situation where we can defend ourselves. Look at the Druze community in southern Syria, right? Look what happened. Look at the Alevites on the coastal region. Look what happened. they died in the thousands. So we don't want the same thing to happen to us. And that's why we don't want to lay down our arms. And we think that a kind of autonomy in this region is the best answer for us. So that's where they are right now, the Syrian Kurds. And Damascus, on the other hand, they feel emboldened too, because they feel, okay, we have given a certain level of autonomy to the Druze community in the south, but look what happened. It invited Israeli involvement, military attacks. It invited instability. It was just a mess. So, in their views, it reinforced their stance that you cannot give an inch to any minority. So that's why you see those two parties, Damascus and the Syrian Kurds, not willing to grant any concessions. So the negotiations there are stuck. So where does that leave Erdogan and his talks with Öcalan? Well, it leaves that whole process stuck as well. Because how is he going to claim victory? How is he going to say to domestic audience that he's ended the PKK when there's a PKK linked autonomous group right across the border with arms? And we're talking about tens of thousands of men and women who are armed and equipped by the United States. So sorry, that was a long answer, but to go back to your original point, yes, in Syria, things are really complicating what Erdogan wants to achieve at home. And the military solution, a Turkish incursion, is not going to fix that problem. And it could only make things worse for both Turkey and for Damascus.
Mm-hmm. And you have to go. So just some forward-looking final notes. What do you think Turkey looks like if the peace process continues to progress? And what do you think happens if it doesn't, if the peace process collapses? Do you have any expectations that you could lay out?
If the okay, so we're talking about several different scenarios. If, let's say, the peace process um, um, improved and then we're getting results, the PKK has laid down its arms and Erdogan agreed to grant constitutional rights, language rights. But the question is, in return for what? What has the pro-Kurdish party agreed to grant in return to Erdogan? So that is the key. If the pro-Kurdish party doesn't agree to Erdogan's efforts to consolidate his own power, that scenario is actually could be a good scenario. And maybe not a good scenario, but maybe not as bad. Because at the end of the day, the Kurds are already suffering because of the democratic deficit of the country, like everyone else, but maybe in many ways more. And yet, yes, they tried their best. They wanted to reach a peaceful resolution, and they agreed to this. Nothing happened. They will still have the same problems that they've had for decades, right? So again, it all boils down to whether the pro-Kurdish party is going to help Erdogan create a system where ballot box does not matter. So if they do, we are talking about a very depressing Turkey where not just Turks, but Kurds will also be stripped of their basic rights. You can never trust an autocrat, even if though it's written in the constitution, right? So you will be in a place where Turks will be worse off, Kurds will be worse off, and then the goodwill that the Kurds had accumulated among the Turkish segments of the country will have eroded. That's not a good Turkey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, on that note, let's see what happens next, because honestly, it could be anything. Early elections, CHP has a grand strategy. Let's see what happens. Very much appreciate your time. I've been talking to Gönül Tol, for people who logged in late. She's the director of the Turkey program at the Middle East Institute in Washington and author of the book Erdogan's War, A Strongman's Struggle at Home and in Syria. Thank you for joining us, Gönül.
Thank you so much, Diego.
And thank you to our listeners. If you missed part of this show, it will be on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube in a few hours. And I'll provide the links there. This podcast is a production of Turkey Recap. Go to turkeyrecap.com for more coverage from right here in Ankara. Stay safe and stay well.